There are rivers that carry stories, and then there are rivers that carry empires. The Bonny River, winding, silent, and deceptive in its calm, once carried both. It was not just a body of water, it was a living artery pulsing with the trade and ambitions of the Ibani people. Long before the Europeans even anchored their schooners along the Niger Delta's mangrove fringes, Bonny had already built a world, one made of carved canoes, disciplined warriors, and the relentless rhythm of commerce. The truth about Africa from Africans. To understand the rise of the Bonny Empire, one must begin with the war canoe houses, or as the Bani people called it, the Duawari. These were not just military formations, they were families, corporations, governments, and armies all woven into one intricate structure. A man's identity was tied to his house, his fortune tied to his trade, and his honor bound to his strength in war. Every canoe, every musket, every carved oar spoke of allegiance. The Duari system was perhaps one of the most advanced indigenous administrative frameworks in pre-colonial Africa. It was the backbone of Ibani society, a kind of living organism with many hearts beating as one. Each war house was autonomous in its internal governance, yet connected through an overarching political order centered on the Amayanabo, the king of Bonny. Beneath him stood the Amadupu, district heads who managed various sections of the community, and the Ikwangi Sididapu, lineage heads responsible for keeping the peace and enforcing house discipline. At its core, the warhouse system was built for survival, political survival, economic survival, and when necessary, military survival. It was a world where commerce and combat blurred easily. A trading expedition could transform into a war campaign overnight, and a war canoe that was once carried palm oil could just as quickly carry men with muskets. Bonny's rise came from its duality. Its people were both traders and warriors, diplomats and opportunists, and they mastered the delicate balance between negotiation and intimidation. By the early 18th century, Bonny had evolved into a sophisticated city-state, a maritime powerhouse whose influence stretched from the creeks of the Delta to the markets of the Atlantic world. But there's a strange truth about success. It rarely arrives alone. Power brings envy. Wealth invites rivalry. As the Douari houses grew richer from trade, they also grew restless. Ambition swelled faster than loyalty. And beneath the calm surface of Bonny's glittering prosperity, all rivalries simmered, waiting for one spark to set the entire delta ablaze. Every war house began as a family, or something close to it. A patriarch, usually a respected warrior or trader, gathered followers, kin, and clients under his authority. These followers weren't merely relatives by blood, but people bound by mutual dependence and loyalty. Together they formed a house, a douari, with a recognized name, a distinct identity, and most importantly, a war canoe, the ultimate symbol of independence and pride. The term war canoe is not metaphorical. These were massive vessels, sometimes carrying up to 100 men, carved from one single tree trunk and engineered for speed, stability, and power. A single fleet of canoes could control the waterways, impose tolls, or launch devastating raids. Each house maintained its fleet, not just for defense, but also as a demonstration of strength. The number of canoes owned by one person was a political statement. Bonny's war houses were originally 14, the great lineages that made up the kingdom's early aristocracy. But over time, through allegiances, wars, and schisms, new houses emerged. Each house was both a social institution and a military-industrial complex. It produced goods, organized trade caravans, trained warriors, and even managed slaves, who worked on plantations or served as rowers and porters. In this structure, hierarchy mattered. The house head or war house chief was the ultimate authority. His word was law within the house. Beneath him were sub-chiefs, canoe captains, and specialized guilds craftsmen who repaired weapons and built canoes. The system encouraged loyalty through patronage. Wealth flowed downwards. Protection flowed upwards. It was an equilibrium of mutual need. One might say the Dwawari system was Bonny's greatest invention, but also its most fatal weakness. Because as the houses grew, so too did their ambitions. They competed for trade routes, European alliances, and influence at court. And when wealth began to pool unevenly among them, suspicion replaced solidarity. The kingdom sat perfectly along the waterways that connected the delta's interior markets with the Atlantic. Through these routes came slaves, ivory, palm and goods. The houses that controlled the river mouths controlled everything. By the 18th century, Bonny had become the delta's primary port for the transatlantic slave trade. Later, when the British abolished slavery, the same war houses seamlessly adapted, shifting their focus to palm oil, which now replaced human cargo as the new liquid gold. The same networks of canoes and the same house rivalries, the same power structures, only the product changed. The shift didn't reduce Bonny's military nature. If anything, it intensified it. Trade wealth meant better weapons. The Bonny houses were among the first in the Delta to acquire and master European firearms and artillery. Long before formal colonization began, they purchased flintlock muskets, cannons, and gunpowder from British and Dutch traders, not merely for display but for tactical advantage, and they used them well. The war canoe captains were not ignorant men, they were tacticians. They learned to coordinate volleys of musket fire from canoes, to use the tide and mangrove cover for ambushes, and to maintain logistical lines across miles of winding creeks. When house rivalries broke into open conflict, battles were not random skirmishes, but deliberate military operations involving reconnaissance, supply chains, and even what we might call intelligence gathering. In sense, Bonny's military sophistication, it was organized warfare. Each house maintained its private army and its own foreign trade agents, meaning that diplomacy, espionage, and warfare all coexisted in a single self-contained political system. But the war houses were not just engines of trade and war. They were microcosms of politics. Every chief dreamed of expanding his house, of controlling more trade routes, of seating his candidates as Amayanabo, which is the overall king or chief. The throne itself was never truly secure. Each succession stirred whispers and plots, and the houses maneuvered endlessly to secure influence. To understand the latter civil war, the split that would birth the kingdom of Opobo, one must understand these early political dynamics. The throne of Bonny was not a hereditary monarchy in the European sense. It was a rotating kingship, negotiated among the houses. Power flowed through consensus, though often that consensus was coerced by intimidation or economic leverage. By the early 19th century, the two greatest houses had emerged. The Fubara Manila Pebble House, led by the formidable chief Oko Jumbo, and the Opobo Ani Pebble House, under the ambitious chief Jaja, later known as Jaja of Opobo. These two men would define the next generation of Ibani history. Their rivalry was not born from petty pride, but from the structural contradictions within the Dwawari system itself. a system that encouraged ambition but provided no mechanism to contain it. Both chiefs were merchants and warriors, both products of Bonny's martial commercial order. Each commandeered immense wealth, private fleets, and standing militias. Each maintained direct trade relations with the British merchants who anchored their ships off Bonny's river mouth. But as the houses grew stronger, the king grew weaker. The monarchy's authority waned, while the chief's autonomy expanded. It was only a matter of time before Bonny's carefully balanced canoe capsized. It is tempting to imagine pre-colonial Africa as a place of spears and shields, but Bonny's war houses defy that stereotype. By the mid-19th century, they were already deploying imported firearms in significant quantities. Cannons guarded the river entrances. Musketeers stood watch at house compounds. Powder magazines were maintained with precision. Bonny's chief had long understood that in the game of maritime trade, firepower was diplomacy. The possession of muskets not only deterred local rivals like the Kalabari and the Okrika, but also signaled power to European traders. A chief with well-armed men could demand better prices, enforce trading monopolies, and protect his agents inland. It's important to note that these were not ceremonial weapons. Bonny's musketeers drilled regularly. Some houses imported European gunpowder in bulk, storing it in bamboo silos that became both status symbols and strategic assets. The cannons, usually small ship-mounted pieces, were repurposed to defend river forts or used in naval engagements against rival canoes. By the time the British were still debating pacification, the Ibanis were already masters of small-scale artillery warfare. In one account, rival houses reportedly engaged in nighttime cannon bombardments that lasted for hours, the sound echoing across the mangroves like distant thunder. It's a striking image, a delta night, firelight flickering across the water, and ancient trees trembling under the roar of imported iron. As Bonny's trade expanded, so did its contradictions. Wealth poured in from the hinterlands, palm oil, ivory, goods of every kind, but the distribution of that was uneven. Some houses closer to the trade routes grew unimaginably rich. Others, sidelined from the main channels, grew resentful. Foreign merchants, especially the British, soon learned how to exploit these internal tensions by favoring certain chiefs with better trade deals or offering diplomatic recognition. They played one house against another. Bonny's prosperity, which once united his people, slowly became a wedge that divided them. It is said that by the mid-1860s, Bonny was a kingdom smiling on the outside but bleeding within. The war houses still paraded their fleets. Their chiefs still performed grand ceremonies, but everyone knew something was coming. Rumors spread of betrayals, of sacred taboos being broken, of the king's waning authority. When King George Pebble, under the influence of Okojumbo, the British missionaries, declared that the monitor lizard, once a sacred deity, was no longer divine, it seemed like a mere religious reform. But in truth, it was a spark, one that reignited an old fire of rivalry and rebellion. The Duowari, once symbol of Bonny's unity, now became engines of fragmentation. Each house armed itself, gathered allies, and watched the tides for signs of war. And in September 1869, the waiting ended. Okojumbo's forces struck first, Attempting to seize control of the river approaches, Jaja responded with disciplined precision. He had studied warfare not as ritual, but as logistics. His canoes moved in coordinated waves. His musketeers fired in volleys rather than in scattered bursts. Contemporary accounts suggest that Jaja's forces were unusually organized for the Delta of that era, perhaps a reflection of his merchant's mind, where timing and coordination were everything. The fighting was fierce and chaotic. Entire sections of Bonny Town were reduced to ash, the air filled with smoke and the creeks with the wreckage of canoes. Both sides possessed muskets, but there were whispers that Jaja's men had secured small cannon, perhaps acquired through British or Portuguese intermediaries. Whether this is entirely true is difficult to prove, but local oral traditions insist that Bonny heard the thunder of cannon that year, echoing for miles. For months, neither side could claim victory. The town itself became uninhabitable, and trade, the lifeblood of the Delta, grounded to a halt. The British, alarmed at the disruption of their palm oil shipment, sent envoys to mediate, but mediation could not mend the pride that had already been wounded. In the end, it was not brute strength that decided the war, but exhaustion and strategy. Jaja, realizing that Bonny itself was too divided to be saved, made a bold decision. He led his followers, the entire Anapebo faction, out of the city. Canoe after canoe slipped away through the mangrove channels, carrying warriors, traders, women, and children. They moved eastward, guided by the tides and their chief's unwavering vision, until they reached a place the Bani called Opobo. There, on the banks of a river that opened wide and calm into the sea, Jaja built a new city. It was both an exodus and a founding. Oko Jumbo, left behind in a scarred Bonny, claimed victory, though it was a hollow one. The trade that once made Bonny rich now flowed towards Opobo, under Jaja's control. Within a few years, Jaja had re-established the trade networks, built new alliances, and declared himself King Jaja of Opobo. The very name became a symbol of self-made power, a reminder that in the Delta, a man's origins mattered less than his will to command. The legacy of the Civil War lingered. The once mighty kingdom never fully recovered. Its creeks, once busy with the hum of commerce, fell quiet. Some say that even decades later, fishermen could still find fragments of musket barrels buried in the mud banks. In the broader sense, the war marked the beginning of the end of the old order of the Niger Delta. The war houses had torn themselves apart at the moment when European imperial interest was solidifying. The same muskets that once defended sovereignty had ironically paved the way for dependence. The age of fire burned fiercely but briefly. It consumed kings and chiefs, and when the smoke cleared, a new reality emerged, one where survival meant adaptation, and the most adaptable of all was Jaja. His brilliance would soon collide with forces than any rival house, forces that came not from across the creeks, but from across the sea. That, of course, belongs to the next chapter.